So a little bit of background, like I guess like growing up, I was always that kid that like never stopped asking why, and it really just like drove my parents absolutely nuts. And basically one of the questions that I could never answer was like the question about homelessness, the fact that whenever you took a trip to Chinatown, I was always left in the car with the doors locked and I couldn't look at anybody or say hi to anybody because it was dangerous. And I apparently didn't know how to take no as an answer. So I just kept asking, they wouldn't tell me. I'd see things on television and see all the stigma and the stereotypes about crime and drugs. And I was just confused, and I always wanted to know a little bit more beyond the media. I was a skeptical kid. And my mom thought I was just like, I know I had issues. But because she couldn't answer my questions, I just went to volunteer in the community in the downtown Eastside at age 14. This was 14 years ago, I was in 9th grade. And I had the honor to learn 2 very important lessons from the community, and they had allowed me to, be a part of some of their stories, and shared 2 things that actually shaped Employe Empower today. So the first one was that actually when I was 14, we went on an out trip, and we were handing out care packages to residents in the community. And this elderly gentleman, super kind, who was in a wheelchair, and he actually looked at me and he was like, I don't really need this care package. I kind of just need a haircut because I have a job interview tomorrow, but please give this, toothpaste, toothbrush, toiletries care package to somebody who needs it more than I do. And at that moment, it was my first lesson of dignity, the importance of listening to what people need rather than assume. And it's so easy to just, what we think people need isn't always what people need. So I took that lesson to heart. That was kind of my calling moment. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take this. I was still in university at SFU actually. And I thought, let's just start the street store, which is actually a concept based on a dignified shopping experience. It's like a free pop-up clothing store for people experiencing homelessness to choose what they want and need at no cost. We set it up like a real retail store. There's haircuts, food, clothes, toiletries, anything, like a giant festival with music. And throughout the past 7 years that we've done that, have the opportunity to really talk to many residents, because people are coming in a good mood, and naturally you have conversation. And what I learned, the question I always ask, so what's really going on right now? Where are you at? How can the community best support you? Because I don't know that, only the residents know. So just practicing that active listening since 2014, and one of the through lines and commonalities I found amongst most people, of course, I'm not going to speak for the whole population, but what I heard a lot of was just the need for long-term support and tools to help people help themselves so they can help others. Many people want to contribute, but just lack the tools and resources to do so. And we got a lot of questions about, supporting self-employment, entrepreneurship. And so we got thinking, we thought, well, can we do more than the street store? Street store was an annual event. Can we evolve the street store into a not-for-profit? And so when I learned that second lesson, and that was through a young boy named Justin, the lesson of long-term support, he basically came running into the street store, just 4-year-old boy, bolting his whole body towards this toy tent. And I remember thinking to myself, it's 8 a.m., there's no parents, he's running in this missing kid. So all the alarms were going off, and we started to just walk towards him, but he bolted through all of us. I thought he was gonna come in for a hug, but clearly not. He bolted under my armpit. He wanted to get the guitar, and then his parents came in after and said, hey, so sorry, Justin, he's just so excited he saw toys, because we don't have enough affordable income to actually give Justin a Christmas gift. It was a Christmas event. So that was kind of where the long-term support kind of really just smacked some reality into me. And I left my corporate job at PW at the time. I was an event planner, and started Employe Empower in 2018, which is almost 3 years ago. And we really focus on long-term hand up. So tolerance ambiguity, I can define that as confidence in the face of the unknown, right? Okay, well, through that lens, I would say when March 2020 hit, many charities are actually impacted threefold, right? There is the physical impact, the economic impact, and then the most impactful one I would say is emotional. Lots of people who face barriers have to be isolated at home. Many do not have family members, let alone access to technology. So think of the times that we call people to stay connected. Not many people have, the privilege or the means to have access to those, technological gadgets to stay connected to the world. And so emotionally wise, that's more so like the mental health piece. And it really made me want to learn more from the community and just listen again. Like when we first started Employe Empower, it was a lot of listening to the community, to what they needed. And I want to do the same thing during this pandemic. Granted, I'll be honest, it was really hard in the beginning, psychologically for the whole team. We had fundraising plans that just like went off the rail. Like we were on a train and then we like just fell off the train and then we didn't even know where the train tracks were for a little while. And that's just like sharing the vulnerable reality of it. Had a couple of vulnerability hangovers and I thought, okay, let's just remember the practices that we used to do and let's use them again. So we listened, and I actually had met I came across a 91-year-old grandma actually. She had her last daughter just passed away, didn't have a TV, didn't have a phone, and was just so afraid to leave her home to even get groceries. And I met her through one of our program members, an entrepreneur, and said, hey, I can't really afford groceries for her, but do you mind doing this one time for my friend who's in her 90s, also has asthma. And I remember when I dropped off the groceries to her, I just knocked on the door and said, hey, your groceries outside, come out whenever you're ready. And I remember we had a conversation through the door. And she said, hey, like, thanks so much for coming. Honestly, it's kind of, lonely back here. And I kind of wish that we had more virtual check-ins or like some kind of service to like check in on your well-being, like safely. And that moment was like another moment that was similar to like the lesson 2 of like the long-term support with a young boy. It was just thinking, oh, wow, like, well, how can we help people stay connected in a way that's safe? And so that was kind of where the confidence kind of came. Like there was unknown first and the confidence came after listening. And so we thought, well, our entrepreneurs are economically impacted right now and physically. They're socially isolating and they can't go out to sell their work. So why don't we help them build business leadership in a different way? Why don't we mobilize entrepreneurs in our program to make these phone calls to socially isolated residents? And that way they're learning business leadership and they're also staying connected. Kind of like fulfilling all those like threefold impact. I have like twofold, right? There's like a mindset and then there's like things that I did, like tangible versus intangible. Okay, and the mindset wise, I had to kind of remind myself to trust that I could get through things. Like trust that I can survive the wreckage, right? Because I was a wreck at that time, like crying, thinking like, oh man, like, are we gonna fold? But then there's voices in my head, that come up and you just gotta take some time to validate and address them first. This is more of a mental wealth piece that I talk about. I give them names, like Doubtful Daisy, Latifah's the critique. And I kind of have to get my headspace into the right place first before taking action. So I had to remind myself that I have the resources to navigate the storm. And I trust that I can do it because I've done it in the past, like using past data to kind of help you move through the turmoil in the moment. Because sometimes like we can get in our heads, we say, oh, no, you can't do it. But you have to think, well, actually I did it this time, so you can do it again. And so in terms of being specific of how I combated it, I think just really looking around and being okay with asking for help. Because sometimes when you're going through challenges, like you kind of, like at least for myself, like I felt like it was a burden to ask for help, or like, oh, you should just handle it on your own. If you ask for help, it's a sign of weakness. And so I learned to, ask. When we adapt, it means that we're okay with change. And I think as someone who really thrives off structure and schedules, this was actually a tough question for me, but I'll answer it as honestly as I can, because I did have to break out of that throughout my journey of like being an entrepreneur. Like I loved everything scheduled and planned and like had it planned A, B, C, D, E for any kind of mishaps that would come about. But there are moments where I learned I can't actually control everything. And that is a mindset again, like it's not going to be perfect and I can't control everything, such as this pandemic in 2020. And so that like headspace and mantra like did help like with becoming more adaptive, because I don't know if you can relate, but sometimes when I create a project or have a timeline for something, I want to follow that timeline, but for the first time ever, we had to adjust like all of our revenue, our program delivery. Some people felt ill and couldn't help but we can't, as human beings, we just can't help but want to remove the pain from the people that we care about, but we couldn't do that. And so emotionally, that was really tough. But being able to adapt to the change and accept that the adaptive piece was to accept that we can't control everything.